Bloodstone Hill. Prologue. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sleepy town of Millhaven. As darkness fell, an eerie silence settled over the streets, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the cool evening breeze. At the edge of town, a winding road snaked its way up a steep incline, leading to the ominous silhouette that loomed against the darkening sky. Bloodstone Hill stood like a silent sentinel, its jagged outline a stark reminder of the town's dark history. Perched atop the hill, barely visible through the thick fog that clung to its slopes, sat the Hawthorne mansion. Once a grand symbol of wealth and power, it now stood abandoned and decaying, its windows dark and lifeless. The mansion's facade, once pristine and imposing, was now a patchwork of crumbling stone and rotting wood. Ivy crept up its walls, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. The grand entrance, with its ornate double doors, hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking softly in the wind. As night fell, the hill seemed to come alive with an otherworldly presence. Locals swore they could hear whispers carried on the breeze, and see fleeting shadows darting between the gnarled trees that surrounded the property. Few dared to venture near the hill after dark, their fear fueled by generations of stories about the cursed Hawthorne family and their ill-fated mansion. The town below seemed to shrink away from Bloodstone Hill, as if trying to distance itself from the dark legacy that cast a pall over Millhaven. Streets closest to the hill remained largely uninhabited, houses boarded up and left to decay. Those who lived nearby spoke in hushed tones about strange lights seen in the mansion's windows on moonless nights, and the mournful wails that sometimes echoed across the town in the dead of night. "I always knew there was something off about that Annabelle," Mrs. Pritchard whispered to her sewing circle. "Saw her gatherin' strange herbs in the woods at midnight once. Mark my words, she dabbled in dark arts." Old Tom, the town drunk, held court at the tavern, his eyes wide with fear. "It's a curse, I tell ya. The Hawthornes angered a spirit with their greed. Now they're payin' the price." Rumors of the family's involvement in occult practices gained traction. Some claimed to have seen strange lights and heard chanting coming from the mansion on moonless nights. Others swore they'd spotted Annabelle Hawthorne conversing with shadowy figures in the family graveyard. As the days passed, whispers of a hidden treasure began to circulate. It started as a vague notion, but soon grew into elaborate tales of vast wealth secreted away within the mansion's walls. The idea of a cursed treasure took hold, capturing the town's imagination. Some believed the Hawthornes had acquired their wealth through nefarious means, and that the treasure was tainted by the suffering of others. Others thought the family had stumbled upon an ancient artifact of great power, one that exacted a terrible price for its possession. "Maybe they found something they shouldn't have," mused Eleanor, the librarian. "Some things are best left buried, you know." As the rumors swirled through Millhaven, a palpable sense of dread settled over the town. The Hawthorne mansion, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, now stood as a stark reminder of the family's tragic end. But beneath the gossip and speculation, a darker truth lurked, one that few in the town could have imagined. The curse of Bloodstone Hill had its roots in the Hawthorne family's desperate actions. Annabelle Hawthorne, driven by an all-consuming fear of losing her family's status and fortune, had delved into forbidden arts. She'd made a pact with a malevolent entity, offering something precious in exchange for protection and prosperity. But the price was far steeper than she'd ever anticipated. On a moonless night, Annabelle had performed a ritual that would forever change the fate of her family. In a hidden chamber deep within the mansion, she'd made the ultimate sacrifice, her youngest son, Henry. The boy's innocent blood had sealed the pact, but not in the way Annabelle had intended. The entity, enraged by the betrayal and misuse of its power, had turned on the Hawthornes. It cursed the family, binding their souls to the mansion and condemning them to eternal torment. The mysterious deaths that followed were just the beginning of a haunting that would span generations. Now, the Hawthorne mansion stood as a focal point for supernatural activity. But the curse didn't stop at the mansion's threshold. It seeped into the very soil of Bloodstone Hill, tainting the land and affecting those who dared to venture too close. The curse fed on fear and curiosity, drawing in the unsuspecting and punishing those who sought to uncover its secrets. Chapter 1: The Legend of Bloodstone Hill. Emily Harper stood at the edge of Millhaven's town square, her gaze fixed on the looming silhouette of the Hawthorne mansion atop Bloodstone Hill. The setting sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets, painting the scene in eerie shades of orange and purple. Since childhood, Emily had been captivated by the stories surrounding the old mansion. Her grandmother's tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena had sparked a fire in her that burned brighter with each passing year. Now, as a fledgling journalist with a penchant for the macabre, she found herself drawn back to the mysteries that had shaped her youth. Emily pulled out her worn notebook, flipping through pages filled with scribbled notes and half-formed theories. "There's more to this than just ghost stories," she muttered to herself, her blue eyes narrowing as she studied the distant hillside. The whispers of curses and hidden treasures that had circulated through Millhaven for decades now seemed more tangible than ever. As darkness fell, Emily felt a familiar thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. Her quest for answers had led her to this moment, standing on the precipice of a mystery that had haunted her hometown for generations. She knew the risks, had heard the warnings, but her desire to unravel the secrets of Bloodstone Hill outweighed any fear. With a deep breath, Emily tucked her notebook away and took her first step towards the mansion. The truth was out there, hidden within those crumbling walls, and she was determined to find it, no matter the cost. As Emily made her way through the town square, a flyer pinned to a community bulletin board caught her eye. She paused, squinting at the faded paper in the dim light. Her heart raced as she read the bold lettering. "One night only, exclusive tour of the Hawthorne mansion. Uncover the secrets of Bloodstone Hill." The local historical society, it seemed, had organized a rare opportunity to explore the infamous house. Emily's journalistic instincts kicked into overdrive. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and dialed Tom's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Tom, you won't believe this. The Historical Society is doing a tour of the Hawthorne mansion tonight. We have to go." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You know how I feel about that place. It's not safe." Emily paced back and forth, her excitement bubbling over. "Come on, it's a guided tour. What could happen? This might be our only chance to see inside." Tom sighed heavily. "I don't know. It would mean so much to me. And I'd feel safer with you there." Another pause, then a reluctant grumble. "Fine. But we stick together, okay? No wandering off." Emily pumped her fist in triumph. "You're the best. Meet me at the town square in an hour." Emily and Tom approached the base of Bloodstone Hill, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. A small group of about a dozen people huddled near the rusty iron gates, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. As they joined the crowd, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The Hawthorne mansion loomed above them, its dilapidated form a stark silhouette against the darkening sky. Windows like hollow eyes seemed to watch their every move. "You okay?" "Just a little nervous, I guess." A tall, lean man with graying hair stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Mr. Collins from the Millhaven Historical Society. Welcome to Bloodstone Hill." His deep voice carried a hint of wariness as he surveyed the group. "Before we begin, I must stress the importance of following my instructions to the letter. The Hawthorne mansion is not just an old house, it's a place with a dark and tragic history. Strange things have happened within these walls, things that defy explanation. A murmur rippled through the group. Emily leaned in, hanging on every word. "It is imperative that we stay together at all times," Mr. Collins continued. "Do not wander off, do not touch anything, and above all, show respect for this place and its history." There was a glint in his eye, a tension in his posture that hinted at hidden motives. "Now," Mr. Collins said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "if you're all ready, let's step into the world of the Hawthorns and uncover the secrets of Bloodstone Hill." The group began their ascent up Bloodstone Hill, the gravel path giving way to overgrown weeds and gnarled roots. Emily felt her heart racing, not just from the exertion but from a growing sense of anticipation. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them, waiting. A strange pull tugged at her, urging her forward, as if something inside the mansion was calling out to her. Tom's grip on her hand tightened. I don't like this," he muttered, his voice tight with tension. "Something feels off." Emily squeezed back reassuringly, but her eyes remained fixed on the mansion. "I know, but we're already here. Don't you want to know what's inside?" Tom shook his head, his face pale in the fading light. "Not really, no." The pull she felt earlier intensified, becoming almost irresistible. Mr. Collins' voice cut through the eerie silence. "Stay close, everyone. We're almost there." The group huddled closer together, their earlier excitement replaced by a palpable unease. Whispers and nervous glances bounced between them as they approached the mansion's imposing front doors. Emily pressed on, her determination growing with each step. Despite the oppressive atmosphere and Tom's obvious discomfort, she couldn't turn back now. The secrets of the Hawthorne mansion were within reach, and she was going to uncover them, no matter what. The massive doors of the Hawthorne mansion groaned open, releasing a gust of stale air that carried the scent of dust and decay. Mr. Collins ushered the group inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Emily stepped over the threshold, her heart pounding. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and she felt a sudden chill that went beyond the cool air of the abandoned house. Her skin prickled with goosebumps, and she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched. The foyer stretched before them, a cavernous space filled with shadows. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and sheets draped over what must have once been elegant furniture. Emily's eyes darted around, trying to take in every detail. A grand staircase dominated the far wall, its once polished banister now dull and splintered. Emily pulled out her phone, ready to document everything. As she raised it to take a photo, the screen flickered and went dark. She frowned, tapping it uselessly. "What's wrong?" "My phone just died," Emily muttered, shoving it back in her pocket. "It was fully charged before we left." A nervous murmur rippled through the group. As they moved deeper into the house, Emily's sense of unease grew. The walls seemed to press in around them, and every creak and groan of the old house made her jump. She tried to focus on the historical details, the peeling wallpaper, the tarnished picture frames, but her mind kept wandering to the stories of the Hawthorne family's tragic fate. Emily's gaze was drawn to a dusty mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing behind her reflection, but when she whirled around, there was nothing there but shadows. Mr. Collins led the group deeper into the mansion, his eyes flicking from one shadowy corner to another. He maintained a facade of calm authority, but inside, his heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. He directed the group toward a narrow hallway to the left of the grand staircase. This part of the house was rarely seen by visitors in the Hawthorns' time. Emily noticed the subtle way he steered them, and her curiosity piqued. There was something almost predatory in his movements, as if he were a hunter closing in on his prey. She glanced at Tom, who seemed oblivious, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit corridor. The hallway was lined with portraits of the Hawthorne family, their eyes following the group with an eerie intensity. Mr. Collins paused before one particularly grand painting of Annabel Hawthorne, her gaze both stern and sorrowful. "Annabel Hawthorne," he said, gesturing to the portrait. "A woman of great beauty and ambition. It is said she was deeply involved in the occult, which ultimately led to the family's tragic demise." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she studied Annabel's painted eyes. There was something almost lifelike about them, as if they held secrets just waiting to be uncovered. "Let's move on," Mr. Collins urged, breaking the spell. He led them to a small, ornate door at the end of the hallway. This room was Annabel's private study. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered space filled with dusty books and strange artifacts. Emily's pulse quickened. This room felt different, more charged, as if the air itself buzzed with unseen energy. Mr. Collins' flashlight scanned the room, lingering on a large, intricately carved desk. He walked over, running his fingers along the edges, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed. "This desk," he said, "was rumored to have a hidden compartment where Annabel kept her most prized possessions." The group huddled around, their whispers filling the room with a nervous energy. A soft click echoed in the study, and a small drawer slid open. Mr. Collins' face lit up with triumph, but it quickly fell when he saw the contents. Dust and a few old letters were all that remained. "Disappointing," he muttered, his voice low enough that only Emily could hear. Emily's eyes narrowed. There was more to Mr. Collins than met the eye, and she intended to find out exactly what he was searching for. Chapter 2: A Glimpse of the Past. Mr. Collins ushered the group into the parlor, a room that once echoed with laughter and lively conversation. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of light that managed to penetrate the heavy curtains. Sheets draped over furniture created eerie, misshapen forms in the dim light. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Collins began, his voice taking on a theatrical tone, "welcome to the heart of the Hawthorne mansion." Emily's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. "This parlor," Mr. Collins continued, "was once the crown jewel of Millhaven's social scene. The Hawthornes hosted grand soirees here, entertaining the elite of society." He moved to the center of the room, his flashlight beam dancing across the shrouded furniture. But all that changed on that fateful night in 1899. It was here, in this very room, that Annabel Hawthorne was last seen alive, Mr. Collins said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights and hearing unearthly screams coming from the mansion that night. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her. She glanced at the other tour members, noting their wide eyes and nervous expressions. The next morning, Mr. Collins went on, the entire Hawthorne family was found dead in their beds, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer terror. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Emily noticed Mr. Collins' eyes gleam with satisfaction at their reaction. "Some say it was a curse," he said, his voice low and ominous. "Others believe Annabel's dabbling in the occult opened a door to something unnatural." As Mr. Collins spoke, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the room had grown colder. She rubbed her arms, trying to dispel the goosebumps that had formed. As Mr. Collins continued his macabre tale, Emily's attention drifted. A faint glimmer caught her eye, drawing her gaze to a corner of the room. There, partially obscured by years of dust and grime, stood an ornate mirror. Its gilded frame peeked through the layers of neglect, hinting at its former grandeur. Emily felt an inexplicable pull towards the mirror. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her away from the group. Tom noticed her departure and whispered, "Where are you going?" She ignored him, focused solely on the mysterious object before her. As she approached, the air around her seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin like an invisible barrier. Emily reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she wiped away the dust from the mirror's surface. The grime came away easily, revealing the smooth glass beneath. She leaned in closer, her breath fogging the newly cleared surface. As the condensation faded, Emily's eyes widened in shock. Staring back at her was not her own reflection, but the face of a woman. Pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into Emily's soul. The ghostly visage lasted only a moment before vanishing, leaving Emily to wonder if she had imagined it. Emily turned, her heart racing. The rest of the group stared at her, a mix of curiosity and concern on their faces. She opened her mouth to speak, but found herself at a loss for words. Tom noticed Emily's sudden pallor and hurried to her side, concern etched across his face. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes darting between her and the mirror. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Emily blinked rapidly, struggling to find her voice. I think I did. There was a woman's face in the mirror. She looked so haunted. Tom peered into the mirror, his brow furrowed in concentration. He tilted his head, examining it from different angles, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just their own reflections stared back at them, distorted slightly by the aged glass. I don't see anything unusual, Em. It's probably just an old mirror playing tricks on you. This place is creepy enough to make anyone jumpy. Emily shook her head, frustration creeping into her voice. No, Tom. I know what I saw. It wasn't just a trick of the light. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not saying you didn't see something. But this house is ancient, and it's got a reputation. It's natural for our minds to play tricks on us in a place like this. His words were meant to be reassuring, but Emily felt a twinge of annoyance at his skepticism. She knew what she had seen, even if she couldn't explain it. Maybe you're right, she conceded, not wanting to argue. It was probably nothing. But as she spoke the words, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. The mansion suddenly felt more alive, more present. It was as if the brief glimpse in the mirror had opened a connection between her and the house, one that thrummed with an energy she couldn't quite explain. Tom gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Come on, let's rejoin the group. Mr. Collins is probably wondering where we've gone off to. Emily nodded, allowing Tom to lead her back to the others. But as they walked away, she couldn't resist throwing one last glance over her shoulder at the mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in its depths, but it was gone before she could be sure. Mr. Collins cleared his throat, drawing the group's attention back to him. His eyes glinted with a mix of excitement and trepidation as he prepared to reveal the most chilling part of the mansion's history. Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the most tragic and mysterious event in the Hawthorne family's history. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his captive audience. On a night much like this one, in the summer of 1892, the entire Hawthorne family was found dead in their beds. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, her earlier experience with the mirror still fresh in her mind. Mr. Collins continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sheriff Holloway, responding to reports of screams from the mansion, discovered a scene that defied explanation. Every member of the family, from the elderly grandmother to young Henry, lay lifeless, their faces frozen in expressions of abject terror. The most perplexing aspect, Mr. Collins said, leaning in conspiratorially, was the complete lack of physical evidence. No signs of struggle, no wounds, no trace of poison. It was as if their very souls had been torn from their bodies. A woman in the group let out a small whimper, clutching her husband's arm tightly. Rumors spread like wildfire through Millhaven. Some spoke of a curse, others of dark rituals gone wrong. But to this day, no one knows for certain what transpired on that fateful night. Emily's mind raced, connecting the dots between the family's mysterious demise and her vision in the mirror. She raised her hand, unable to contain her curiosity. Mr. Collins, were there any theories about what might have caused the curse? Mr. Collins turned to her, a glimmer of intrigue in his eyes.
Ah.
An inquisitive mind. There were whispers, my dear, of Annabel Hawthorne's involvement in the occult. Some believed she made a pact with dark forces to protect the family's wealth, a pact that ultimately backfired. The group hung on every word, a mixture of fear and fascination etched on their faces. Some huddled closer together, while others, like Emily, leaned in, hungry for more information. Collins finished his chilling tale, his eyes darted around the room, scanning the walls and furnishings with newfound intensity. He cleared his throat and adjusted his collar, a hint of eagerness creeping into his voice. Now, if you'll follow me, there's a particular area of the mansion I believe you'll find fascinating. He gestured towards a narrow hallway, his movements more hurried than before. Emily noticed the change in Mr. Collins' demeanor. His earlier solemn composure had given way to an almost feverish excitement. She exchanged a glance with Tom, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. As the group moved down the hallway, Mr. Collins' commentary became more focused on the mansion's architecture and hidden spaces. The Hawthornes were known for their paranoia, he explained, running his hand along the wood-paneled walls. They incorporated numerous secret compartments and passageways throughout the house. He paused at a seemingly unremarkable section of the wall, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. I've always wondered if there might be more to discover here. Perhaps one of you keen-eyed visitors might spot something I've overlooked? Emily watched as Mr. Collins encouraged the group to examine the area closely, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed anticipation. It was clear he was using the tour as an opportunity to search for something, though what exactly, she couldn't be sure. As they moved to the next room, Mr. Collins' attention was drawn to an ornate fireplace. This fireplace has always intrigued me, he mused, more to himself than the group. The craftsmanship is exquisite, but I've often wondered if it served a dual purpose. He invited the group to inspect the fireplace, subtly directing their attention to specific areas. Emily noticed how he watched their movements intently, as if hoping one of them might accidentally trigger a hidden mechanism. Tom leaned in close to Emily, whispering, "Is it just me, or does Collins seem more interested in the house itself than giving us a tour?" Emily nodded, her journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. "He's definitely looking for something," she whispered back. "But what?" As the tour progressed, Mr. Collins' facade of the knowledgeable guide began to slip further. His eyes constantly scanned the rooms, and his hands twitched with barely contained excitement whenever they entered a new area. It became increasingly clear that the guided tour was merely a cover for his own search within the mansion's walls. "We're now entering the most sensitive area of the mansion," Mr. Collins announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "These are the bedrooms where the Hawthorne family met their tragic end." Emily felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach as they approached the first bedroom door. The air grew noticeably colder, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing an invisible threshold into the heart of the mansion's dark history. Tom sidled up next to her, his face pale. "You okay?" he murmured. Emily nodded, though she was far from okay. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but her curiosity pushed her forward. Mr. Collins paused before opening the door, his hand hovering over the tarnished brass knob. "What you're about to see has been preserved as it was found on that fateful morning. I must ask for complete silence out of respect." The door creaked open, revealing a master bedroom frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. The massive four-poster bed dominated the room, its sheets still rumpled as if its occupants had just risen. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. The atmosphere was thick with tension, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She could almost feel the echoes of that terrible night reverberating through the walls. As the group filed in, Emily's gaze was drawn to a vanity in the corner. A hairbrush lay on its surface, strands of long dead hair still caught in its bristles. Next to it, a pocket watch had stopped at 3:17, its hands frozen for over a century. Mr. Collins began to speak in hushed tones about the scene discovered by Sheriff Holloway, but Emily found it hard to focus on his words. Her sense of unease intensified with each passing moment, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes. Chapter 3: The Seance. Mr. Collins guided the group down a narrow staircase to the basement, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "We're now entering what I believe to be the most spiritually active part of the house. Please, stay close together." The wooden steps creaked ominously under their feet as they descended into the darkness. Emily felt the air grow colder with each step, a clammy dampness seeping through her clothes. The beam of Mr. Collins' flashlight cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, revealing patches of mold and crumbling mortar. As they reached the bottom, the oppressive atmosphere intensified. Emily's breath came out in visible puffs, and she hugged herself tightly, trying to ward off the chill. Tom moved closer to her, his face etched with concern. "This basement," Mr. Collins began, sweeping his flashlight across the room, "has been the site of numerous paranormal experiences. Many visitors have reported feeling touched by unseen hands or hearing whispers when no one else is around." The group huddled closer together, eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit space. Ancient shelves lined the walls, laden with dust-covered jars and mysterious artifacts. In one corner, a rusted boiler loomed like a sleeping beast. Emily's skin prickled with goosebumps, and not just from the cold. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were pressing in on them. She couldn't shake the sensation of being watched by multiple unseen presences. Mr. Collins led them deeper into the basement, his excitement palpable despite the group's growing unease. "It's said that Annabelle Hawthorne conducted many of her occult rituals down here," he explained, his voice tinged with a mix of fascination and reverence. As they approached the far end of the room, Emily noticed strange symbols etched into the floor. The markings formed a large circle, with intricate designs spiraling outward. Mr. Collins' flashlight beam lingered on the eerie pattern. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is where we believe the final ritual took place. The one that sealed the family's fate." Mr. Collins produced a set of thick, black candles from his satchel and began placing them around the table's perimeter. "Now," he said, his voice hushed with anticipation, "we're going to attempt something truly extraordinary. A séance to communicate with the spirits of the Hawthorne family." Emily's eyes widened, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside her, his skepticism warring with the undeniable eeriness of their surroundings. Mr. Collins carefully lit each candle, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the basement walls. The air grew thick with the scent of melting wax and musty earth. "Please, take your seats," Mr. Collins instructed, gesturing to the chairs surrounding the table. "We must form an unbroken circle." As the group settled into their places, Emily couldn't help but notice how the candlelight seemed to deepen the lines on everyone's faces, making them look gaunt and haunted. Tom's hand found hers under the table, squeezing it reassuringly. Mr. Collins took his position at the head of the table, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "We're not just here to communicate with the spirits," he explained, his voice low and urgent. "We're hoping they might reveal clues to the location of the hidden Hawthorne treasure." A murmur rippled through the group. Emily felt her journalistic instincts kick into high gear. Was this the real reason behind Mr. Collins' tour? "Now, everyone join hands," Mr. Collins instructed. "We must create a conduit for the spirits to channel their energy." As their hands linked, forming an unbroken chain around the table, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The basement seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. The candle flames flickered and danced, as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. Mr. Collins closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. As Mr. Collins' words faded into silence, the basement seemed to hold its breath. Emily's skin prickled, goosebumps rising along her arms. The air around them grew colder, a chill that seeped into her bones. A faint whisper brushed past her ear, indistinct yet unmistakably there. Emily's eyes darted around the table, searching for the source. The other participants sat motionless, their faces taut with concentration or fear. Tom's hand tightened around hers, his palm clammy with nervous sweat. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat as the candles flickered violently, their flames dancing in erratic waltz. And then she saw her. The woman from the mirror materialized at the head of the table, her form translucent and shimmering in the candlelight. Her Victorian dress hung in tattered folds, and her eyes were hollow pits that seemed to drink in the darkness around them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The spectral figure's gaze locked onto her, pinning her in place with its intensity. Slowly, deliberately, the ghost raised a skeletal hand. Her finger extended, pointing directly at Emily. The room fell away, leaving only Emily and the apparition. The chill in the air deepened, frost forming on the table's surface. Emily's heart thundered in her chest, her mind reeling as she struggled to process what she was seeing. Mr. Collins' voice seemed to come from a great distance. "The spirits are with us," he intoned, his words barely penetrating the fog of Emily's shock. The ghost's lips moved, forming words Emily couldn't hear. She leaned forward involuntarily, straining to understand. The apparition's finger remained fixed on her, unwavering, as if marking her for some unknown purpose. Emily's eyes widened as the ghostly woman's lips moved, forming silent words. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the spirit was trying to communicate directly with her. The apparition's hollow eyes bore into Emily's soul, conveying a sense of urgency and fear. Without warning, Emily jerked her hand away from Tom's, breaking the circle. "We need to leave," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Collins' face contorted with anger. "What are you doing? We mustn't break the..." His words were cut short as the candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging the basement into pitch darkness. A gust of icy wind whipped through the room, carrying with it a chorus of disembodied whispers. "Emily?" Tom's voice quavered in the darkness. "Where are you?" Before she could respond, a cacophony of voices erupted around them. Wails of anguish, angry shouts, and mournful cries filled the air, drowning out the panicked exclamations of the séance participants. Emily fumbled in her pocket for her phone, her hands shaking as she activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of chaos. People stumbled around, bumping into each other and the furniture. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting in impossible ways. They stretched and contracted, forming grotesque shapes that danced at the edge of Emily's vision. "We have to get out of here," someone shouted over the din. Emily swung her light toward the stairs, but the beam flickered and died. In the momentary flash, she caught a glimpse of the ghostly woman standing at the foot of the steps, her arm outstretched in warning. The voices grew louder, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Emily felt a tug on her arm and turned to find Tom, his face pale and drawn in the dim light filtering from upstairs. "Come on," he urged, pulling her toward the exit. As they stumbled toward the stairs, Emily heard a single voice cut through the chaos. It was the ghostly woman, her words clear and chilling, "Leave now, before it's too late." The basement door slammed shut with a resounding bang, cutting off their escape route. Emily and Tom spun around, their eyes wide with terror. The other participants huddled together, their faces pale in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the floorboards above. The air grew thick and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. Emily felt the walls closing in, the room seemingly shrinking around them. Shadows danced and twisted along the walls, taking on monstrous shapes that defied logic. Mr. Collins stood in the center of the room, his face a mask of determination. "We must continue," he insisted, his voice rising above the cacophony of whispers and wails. "The treasure is here, I know it." Tom stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Are you insane? We need to get out of here before something terrible happens." Emily watched as Mr. Collins' eyes darted around the room, searching for something unseen. His obsession with the treasure became painfully obvious, and a chill ran down her spine as she realized the true nature of this tour. "You planned this all along, didn't you? This was never about a historical tour. You're after the Hawthorne treasure." Mr. Collins turned to face her, his expression wild. "You don't understand. The treasure is the key to everything. We can't leave without it." The group began to fracture, some siding with Mr. Collins in a desperate bid to find a way out through the treasure, while others pleaded to focus on escaping the supernatural chaos engulfing them. As the argument escalated, the paranormal activity intensified. Objects began to levitate, swirling around the room in a vortex of ghostly energy. The temperature plummeted, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Emily grabbed Tom's arm, pulling him close. "We need to find a way out," she whispered urgently. "Mr. Collins has lost his mind. He'll get us all killed if we stay here." As the basement descended further into chaos, Emily's mind raced. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place, revealing the sinister truth behind their predicament. "You've been using us all along." Emily shouted at Mr. Collins, her voice barely audible above the supernatural cacophony. "This tour was just a cover for your treasure hunt." Mr. Collins whirled around, his eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and greed. "You don't understand," he snarled, his calm facade crumbling away. "I've spent years researching, decoding old maps and journals. The Hawthorne treasure is here, and it's worth more than you can imagine." Tom stepped protectively in front of Emily, his face contorted with anger. "You led us into this death trap for money? Are you insane?" The other participants looked on in horror as the truth of their situation became clear. Mr. Collins' obsession had put them all in grave danger. As if responding to the rising tensions, the supernatural activity intensified. Books flew off shelves, slamming against walls. Ghostly whispers grew louder, filling the air with unintelligible murmurs. The temperature dropped even further, frost forming on the cold stone walls. Yet Mr. Collins remained oblivious to the escalating danger. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for hidden panels or secret compartments. "We're close," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I can feel it. The treasure is here, waiting to be found." Emily watched in disbelief as Mr. Collins began tapping on walls and pulling at old sconces, completely ignoring the terrified group huddled in the center of the room. His obsession had consumed him entirely, blinding him to the very real threat surrounding them. "We need to find a way out of here," Tom said urgently, gripping Emily's hand. "Collins is too far gone. He'll get us all killed if we stay down here." As they desperately searched for an escape route, Mr. Collins continued his frenzied hunt for the elusive Hawthorne treasure, oblivious to the supernatural storm brewing around them. Chapter 4. No escape. The group huddled together in the center of the basement, their panic rising as the realization of their predicament sank in. The air grew thick with fear, and the shadows on the walls seemed to writhe and twist, taking on menacing shapes that defied explanation. "We need to find a way out," someone shouted, their voice cracking with terror. The group scattered, frantically searching every nook and cranny of the basement for any sign of escape. They pounded on walls, tugged at old pipes, and scoured the floor for hidden trapdoors. All the while, Mr. Collins continued his manic search for treasure, oblivious to the growing danger. Emily and Tom moved together, methodically examining each section of the basement. As they approached a stack of old crates in a corner, Emily noticed something odd about the wall behind them. "Help me move these," she said, already straining to push the heavy boxes aside. Together, they cleared away the debris, revealing a small, weathered door that had been hidden from view. It was barely noticeable, its wood aged to match the surrounding stone. "Look!" Emily exclaimed, running her hand over the rough surface. "There's got to be something behind this." Tom nodded, his face grim with determination. He wedged his fingers into the gap between the door and the frame, pulling with all his might. The old wood groaned in protest, decades of dust and grime making it resistant to their efforts. With a sudden crack, it gave way, swinging open on rusty hinges to reveal a narrow, dark tunnel stretching into the depths of the hill. The musty smell of damp earth wafted out, and Emily shone her phone's flashlight into the opening. The beam illuminated rough-hewn walls and a dirt floor that sloped gently downward. "It looks like it goes pretty deep," Tom said, peering into the darkness. Emily nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension coursing through her. "This could be our way out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily turned to the group, her voice hushed but urgent. "We've found a way out. Everyone, follow us." The panicked tourists rushed toward the hidden door, pushing and shoving in their desperation to escape. Mr. Collins, snapped out of his treasure-hunting trance, scrambled after them. "Wait. You can't leave yet," he shouted, but his protests were drowned out by the commotion. Emily stepped into the tunnel first, her phone's flashlight cutting through the inky darkness. Tom followed close behind, ushering the others in. The narrow passage forced them into single file, the rough stone walls scraping against their shoulders. As they moved deeper into the hill, the air grew colder, their breath visible in the dim light. The whispers that had haunted the basement intensified, echoing off the walls and seeming to come from all directions at once. "Keep moving," Emily urged, her voice tight with tension. "Don't stop." The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the unknown. The group's footsteps echoed eerily, mixing with the increasingly loud whispers to create a cacophony of unsettling sounds. Suddenly, Emily's flashlight began to flicker, the beam wavering and dimming. She shook the phone, desperately trying to keep their only source of light alive. "No, no, no," she muttered, fear creeping into her voice. The light stabilized for a moment, then flickered again. In those brief moments of darkness, the whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, fleeting shapes that vanished when looked at directly. "Emily, what's happening?" "I don't know," she replied, her hand shaking as she held the failing light. "The flashlight's dying." The group pressed closer together, their fear palpable in the cold, damp air. The passage seemed to narrow even further, the walls pressing in on them from all sides. As they rounded another bend in the tunnel, Emily's flashlight illuminated a small chamber ahead. The group stumbled to a halt, their eyes fixed on the ornate mirror standing in the center of the room. It was identical to the one Emily had seen in the parlor, but now its surface was marred by a spiderweb of cracks. An eerie blue light emanated from the mirror, casting long shadows across the rough stone walls. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized the familiar frame and intricate carvings. "It's the same mirror," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the group's ragged breathing. Tom squeezed her hand. "What do you mean?" Before Emily could answer, the air in the chamber grew thick and heavy. The blue light pulsed, sending waves of energy rippling through the room. The tourists huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the ghostly woman materialized in the mirror's fractured surface. Her hollow eyes locked onto Emily, and her lips moved in a silent warning. "Leave," the spectral figure mouthed, her face contorted with urgency. Emily took a step closer, drawn by an inexplicable force. The woman's image flickered, and her voice echoed through the chamber, no longer silent but filled with desperation. "Leave this place," she repeated, her words reverberating off the stone walls. "Before it's too late." The supernatural energy in the room intensified, making the air crackle with electricity. The blue light from the mirror grew brighter, pulsing in time with the woman's words. "We need to go," Tom urged, tugging at Emily's arm. "Now." But Emily remained transfixed, her eyes locked on the ghostly woman in the mirror. She felt a connection, a pull she couldn't explain. The woman's face was familiar, stirring memories of old family photographs she'd seen in her grandmother's attic. The other tourists began to panic, their fear feeding the growing supernatural storm in the chamber. The whispers that had followed them through the tunnel grew louder, merging into a cacophony of otherworldly voices. The mirror's surface rippled like water, distorting the ghostly woman's face. Emily stood transfixed, unable to tear her gaze away from the haunting image. The other tourists pressed against the chamber walls, their faces pale with fear. Without warning, a deafening crack split the air. The mirror's surface splintered, fractures spreading like lightning across its face. Emily barely had time to register what was happening before the entire thing exploded outward. Shards of glass flew through the air, glinting in the eerie blue light. Emily threw her arms up instinctively, shielding her face from the deadly spray. She heard screams from the other tourists, mingling with the sound of shattering glass. Tom's voice cut through the chaos. She lowered her arms, her heart stopping as she saw Tom crumpled on the ground. A large shard of glass protruded from his thigh, blood already soaking through his jeans. "Tom." Emily dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over the wound. He gritted his teeth, face contorted in pain. "We need to keep moving," he gasped out. Emily nodded, fighting back tears. She looked around frantically, spotting a discarded scarf from one of the other tourists. Snatching it up, she quickly wrapped it around Tom's leg, cinching it tight above the wound. "This is going to hurt," she warned, then helped Tom to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his face ashen. The other tourists huddled nearby, eyes wide with shock and fear. "We have to go," Emily urged them, supporting Tom's weight. "Now." The group stumbled forward, leaving behind the shattered remains of the mirror. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ghostly woman's warning echoed in her mind, spurring her on despite the growing dread in her stomach. With Tom's arm draped over her shoulder, Emily staggered forward, supporting his weight as they moved through the tunnel. The other tourists followed close behind, their ragged breaths echoing off the damp stone walls. Almost there, Emily panted, her muscles straining under Tom's weight. She could see a faint glimmer of light ahead, growing brighter with each step. Tom stumbled, nearly pulling them both down. "I can't," he started, but Emily cut him off. "Yes, you can. We're getting out of here." The whispers that had haunted them faded to a distant murmur, barely audible over their labored breathing and shuffling footsteps. Emily focused on the light ahead, willing it to grow closer. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, they emerged into a small clearing. The cold night air hit them like a slap to the face, and Emily gasped, filling her lungs with the crisp, clean scent of pine and damp earth. She helped Tom sink to the ground, his face twisted in pain. The other tourists stumbled out behind them, collapsing onto the grass in exhaustion and relief. Emily looked around, her heart still pounding. They were on the far side of the mansion, away from the main path. The imposing structure loomed behind them, its windows dark and empty. But despite the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "We made it," one of the tourists whispered, voice trembling. Emily nodded, but her relief was short-lived. Tom's makeshift bandage was soaked through with blood, and his skin had taken on a sickly pallor. "We need to get help," she said, fumbling for her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, keeping one eye on the mansion's shadowy facade. As she spoke to the dispatcher, giving their location and explaining Tom's injury, Emily couldn't help but feel that their ordeal wasn't over. The mansion stood silent behind them, but she could sense its malevolent presence, as if it were waiting for something. As the group huddled in the clearing, catching their breath and tending to Tom's wound, a rustling in the nearby bushes startled them. Mr. Collins emerged, his face pale and clothes disheveled. He stumbled towards them, eyes wild and unfocused. "The treasure," he muttered, glancing back at the mansion. "We were so close. I could feel it." Emily's jaw clenched as she watched Mr. Collins pace back and forth, muttering to himself about hidden rooms and secret passages. Despite their narrow escape and Tom's injury, the man seemed oblivious to the danger they'd just faced. "Mr. Collins," Emily called out, her voice sharp with anger. "What were you thinking? We could have died in there." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming with a fervent light. "But the treasure, Miss Harper. Don't you understand? It's still in there, waiting to be found. We can't just leave it." Emily stood up, hands balled into fists at her sides. "Is that all you care about? Look around you. Tom is hurt, we're all traumatized, and you're still fixated on some mythical treasure?" The other tourists murmured in agreement, shooting accusatory glances at Mr. Collins. He seemed to shrink under their collective gaze, but his eyes kept darting back to the looming silhouette of the mansion. "You used us. You put our lives at risk for your obsession." Mr. Collins opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He looked from Emily to the other tourists, then back to the mansion, conflict evident on his face. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the treasure, it's real. I know it is. We can't just walk away." Emily shook her head, disgust clear in her expression. "Yes, we can. And we will." As if to punctuate her words, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers. The group instinctively huddled closer together, eyeing the mansion warily. Chapter 5. The Family Secret. Days after their harrowing escape from the Hawthorne mansion, Emily and Tom found themselves grappling with the aftermath of their ordeal. Tom's injury proved more severe than initially thought. The glass shard had caused significant damage to his thigh, requiring surgery and extensive rehabilitation. As he lay in his hospital bed, Tom stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the terrifying moments in the mansion's hidden chamber. The doctors had been blunt: he would likely walk with a permanent limp, a constant reminder of that fateful night on Bloodstone Hill. Emily visited Tom daily, her face a mask of guilt and concern. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand, but her eyes often drifted to the window, as if searching for something unseen. Tom squeezed her hand. "It's not your fault, Em. We couldn't have known." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she should have known better. At night, in the quiet of her apartment, the memories came flooding back. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, the ghostly woman's hollow eyes haunting her dreams. The whispers that had filled the mansion's halls seemed to follow her, echoing in the corners of her mind. During the day, Emily found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. Objects in her apartment seemed to move on their own, and more than once she caught her reflection in the mirror, only to see a flicker of something else, something old and malevolent, staring back at her. As the days passed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't left the curse behind at Bloodstone Hill. It clung to her like a second skin, a constant presence that set her nerves on edge. She tried to focus on her work, on helping Tom recover, but the mansion's secrets gnawed at her, demanding answers she wasn't sure she wanted to uncover. Emily sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by stacks of old photo albums and shoeboxes filled with faded memories. She'd hoped that immersing herself in her family's history might distract her from the lingering terror of Bloodstone Hill. As she flipped through a dusty album, a yellowed envelope slipped out and fluttered to the ground. Curious, Emily picked it up. The paper felt brittle beneath her fingers, and the faint scent of age wafted up as she carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, the ink faded but still legible. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the date at the top, August 15, 1892. Emily's hands trembled as she began to read. My dearest sister. I write to you with a heavy heart and a warning. The Hawthornes are not what they seem. I've witnessed things in that cursed mansion on Bloodstone Hill that defy explanation. Annabelle's dabbling in the dark arts has awakened something terrible, and I fear for us all. I beg you, stay away from the Hawthornes and their mansion. The price of their ambition is too high, and I worry the consequences will reach beyond their family. There are secrets here that should remain buried. With love and fear. Martha. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Martha, her great-grandmother's name. She'd known her family had deep roots in Millhaven, but this was something else entirely. Her mind raced. Her great-grandmother had known the Hawthornes personally. She'd been aware of their occult practices, of the danger lurking in the mansion. And she'd tried to warn her sister away. Emily's hands shook as she reread the letter. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her family's connection to Bloodstone Hill ran deeper than she could have imagined. The curse that had claimed the Hawthornes, that still lingered in the mansion's halls, wasn't just a piece of local lore. It was part of her own family's dark legacy. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her mind reeling from the implications. She spread out the other contents of the shoebox, searching frantically for more clues. Faded photographs spilled across the floor, and Emily's breath caught as she recognized a face she'd seen before, Annabel Hawthorne, standing arm in arm with a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Emily herself. She flipped the photo over, her heart pounding. In faded ink, it read, Annabel and Martha, summer 1891. Emily's great-grandmother and Annabel Hawthorne had been friends. Close friends, by the looks of it. As Emily dug deeper, more letters emerged. Fragments of a story began to take shape, one of friendship, occult experimentation, and growing unease. Martha's handwriting grew more frantic with each letter, her warnings more urgent. Annabel speaks of a ritual, one letter read. She claims it will secure the family's fortune for generations. I fear she doesn't understand the price she'll pay. Emily's stomach churned as she pieced together the timeline. The final letter from Martha was dated just days before the Hawthornes' mysterious deaths. It hinted at a confrontation, a desperate attempt to stop whatever dark forces Annabel had set in motion. I tried to reason with her, Martha wrote, her penmanship shaky. But Annabel is consumed by this madness. She speaks of a pact, of sacrifices that must be made. I cannot stand idly by, but I fear what my interference might cost. Emily sat back, her mind whirling. Her great-grandmother hadn't just been a bystander to the supernatural events at Bloodstone Hill. She'd been intimately involved, perhaps even instrumental in the curse that now haunted the mansion. But had Martha tried to stop Annabel, or had she played some darker role in the tragedy? Emily's mind raced as she connected the dots between her family's history and the curse of Bloodstone Hill. As she pored over the documents, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The curse wasn't some random supernatural occurrence. It was intrinsically linked to her own bloodline, a dark legacy that had been waiting for her to uncover it. She realized with growing dread that her presence at the mansion hadn't been mere chance or curiosity, it had been an inevitable pull, drawing her back to confront the sins of the past. The ghostly figure of Annabel Hawthorne took on new significance in Emily's mind. Those hollow eyes and sorrowful expression weren't just manifestations of a trapped spirit, they were the gaze of someone seeking justice, or perhaps redemption. Emily recalled the warning in the mirror, the desperate attempt to make her leave. Had Annabelle been trying to protect her, or prevent her from uncovering the truth? The hidden treasure, which Mr. Collins had so obsessively sought, now seemed like a curse in itself. As the pieces fell into place, Emily felt a weight settle on her shoulders. Her journey into the mansion's mysteries hadn't been a random adventure or a journalistic pursuit. It had been the beginning of a reckoning, a confrontation with a past that refused to stay buried. The spirits of Bloodstone Hill weren't just haunting the mansion, they were calling out to her, demanding that she face the truth of what had happened all those years ago. Emily's hands trembled as she read the final letter from her great-grandmother Martha. The words blurred before her eyes, but their meaning was unmistakable. The dark secret at the heart of the Hawthorne curse was far more horrific than she could have imagined. Annabelle has gone too far, Martha's shaky handwriting revealed. She sacrificed her own son, little Henry, in a ritual to protect the family's fortune. The poor boy's screams still haunt me. This act has brought a terrible curse upon them all. Emily felt bile rise in her throat. The image of Annabelle Hawthorne, the ghostly woman in the mirror, took on a new, sinister aspect. She wasn't just a victim of the curse, she was its architect, driven by an obsession to secure her family's wealth and status. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The curse that bound the Hawthorne family's spirits to the mansion wasn't just a supernatural phenomenon, it was a consequence of Annabelle's unthinkable act. The hidden treasure, which Mr. Collins had so desperately sought, was inextricably linked to this dark ritual. Emily realized that Mr. Collins' obsession had awakened more than just spirits. His relentless pursuit of the treasure had intensified the curse's effects, putting them all in danger during their ill-fated tour. The mansion's violent reaction to their presence, the shattering mirror, Tom's injury, it all stemmed from this desperate attempt to protect a fortune stained with innocent blood. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Emily. She understood now why Annabelle's spirit had tried to warn her away. The curse wasn't just haunting the mansion, it was actively guarding its terrible secret and the blood-bought treasure hidden within its walls. Emily sat by Tom's hospital bed, her mind swirling with the dark revelations about her family's connection to the Hawthorne curse. The steady beep of medical equipment provided a stark contrast to the supernatural horrors they had encountered at Bloodstone Hill. "We made it out," Tom said, his voice weak but determined. "That's what matters." Emily nodded. "We did, but the curse is still there. The truth about what really happened to the Hawthornes, the hidden treasure, my family's involvement, it's all still buried in that mansion." Tom's hand tightened around hers. "Emily, you can't be thinking of going back there." She met his gaze, seeing the fear and concern etched in his eyes. "Part of me feels like I have to. Like I'm the only one who can uncover the full truth and maybe even break the curse. That place, it doesn't want its secrets revealed." Emily sighed, knowing he was right. The memory of the shattered mirror, the ghostly apparitions, and the malevolent presence that permeated every corner of the mansion sent a shiver down her spine. Yet, the pull of the mystery remained, tugging at the edges of her consciousness. "I know," she admitted.